Good morning. Finance Committee will please come to order. Welcome, everyone. Are there any citizens who would like to address the committee this morning? There being none, I'll entertain a motion on item number 3, which is the minutes from the July 26th meeting. We have a motion and we have a second. Any further questions? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. I'm going to skip item 4 momentarily and hop into our contracts and go to item 5A. And Wanda, you want to come present for us, please? Good morning.
I have 2 items to present this morning. The first one being replacement of all of our defibrillators. We have 92 defibrillators that we would like to replace. And the reason we are replacing these is we can no longer get batteries for these, and they have exceeded their useful life. So therefore, I'm asking for capital purchase of.
So batteries are important, is what you're saying?
Batteries are important for a defibrillator.
And this is a budgeted item?
We're buying it with contingency money.
Okay. Any questions for Wanda on this?
Which company?
Zoll. And we did get input from the physicians before we purchase this. So.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Bose on item 5A. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a second by Dr. Weber. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Wanda. Item B.
The second item is for replacement of our telemetry monitoring system. This is through GE. This will also make it compatible with all of our monitors that we've just replaced. And the reason we're replacing these monitors is we're having a similar type issue where these have exceeded their life expectancy, and we're frequently having issues and problems with them. And we can no longer, are having difficulty purchasing the telepacks that go with the system from the company. They are no longer manufacturing them. So we've had to go to a third party to even get telemetry packs to keep it up and running currently.
Got it. And this makes it consistent across the house? All the.
This will be to replace the ones in the pavilion area. And on E3, later we will be purchasing the ones for the towers. But this will standardize.
Okay.
And those will also be purchased to standardize as well.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Wanda?
We stay with GE?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Dr. Weber, second by Mr. Bose. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Wanda.
Thank you.
Item C, Ron. Good morning, Ron.
I have a couple of gentlemen here I wanted to introduce. You met these folks before. Mr. Mike Kessler, who's with Arthur Gallagher, who's our broker for the district, and Mr. Bob Duty, who is an insurance consultant who's worked with us for a number of years now in various matters. Both of these gentlemen have helped me tremendously in getting this renewal prepared for today, and I wanted to initially start with recognizing them, and they're certainly
Thank you for being here.
For any questions as well. So to go into the insurance renewal for this year, just a couple of points, and I'll refer to page 29 of the packet in terms of some of the key renewal points. With the exception of the crime coverage and the cyber liability, we're renewing all of the coverages with the incumbent carriers and at the existing limits. I know one of the things these gentlemen look at every year as to whether we're getting competitive rates for the coverages that we keep. And, you know, with and by and large, our carriers have treated the district well, and we've gotten good rates. I will spend a little bit of time talking about both cyber and EPL here in a second. On the property side, y'all recall we talked about the hailstorms from last year, and the district had, I believe, close to $700,000 of claims due to hailstorm damage to some of our roofs of our buildings. And as any insurance works, when you file claims, your premiums tend to go up a little bit, and that's certainly the case here. However, I will say that our folks, the Gallagher folks, did a great job in negotiating our rate because our overall property value for the district has increased to $1.5 billion, and so we received only a 13% increase in our premium year over year. On cyber liability, we had a discussion about that in years past as well, about whether we had enough coverage and kind of the nature of our coverage. We did choose to continue to stay with Beasley as our carrier for cyber. It is kind of they're kind of the watermark or the gold standard as it relates to providing this type of coverage. We've had a number of conversations with them. We did enhance our coverage, even though the aggregate limit, as you'll see, is still at $10 million. We have enhanced coverage in two areas. One, in business interruption, to where if we were to have a ransomware attack or other type of attack and it caused JPS systems to go down, we would have coverage up to $10 million for business interruption, as well as in the new area of data recovery costs, which can be extremely expensive if we had corruption due to attacks, the data recovery costs. Both of those were not included in last year's coverage and now included in our enhanced coverage as well. The other new aspect of cyber that we discussed with Beasley was legal and forensic costs, which are extremely expensive. We talked about that before. If there were to be an attack, even if it didn't result in a fine or a penalty, the organization still incur legal and forensic costs just to understand what all took place or didn't take place. We have a separate limit of $2.5 million in our cyber coverage that does not invoke the 10. That's just for legal and forensic costs, what I used to call war room costs when breaches occur. With the new policy that we're proposing, if God forbid, JPS had an event that it exceeded the $2.5 million and say went to $3 million, this new policy allows us to go into the $10 million of aggregate coverage so that the district wouldn't pay additional for that, and that also is new in this year's policy. So with all of that, the premium went in cyber from roughly 15,000 to 120,000, so about 5,000 increase. And I know General Counsel has been involved in these discussions.
Yeah,
as well.
Ron, members of the board, the two people in my office, John Lynch is sort of my cyber guy, my insurance guy is Scott Cummings, and the three of us met with Ron and with Scott and with David Mendenhall, talked about this. That led to a conference call last Monday with these two gentlemen and some folks from the underwriter. In addition to improved coverage and addressing issues under cyber, the other thing that came out of our meeting last Thursday is an understanding of what Ron and particularly Melinda and David are doing on the IT side. Periodic audits, it's sort of like the secret shopper type thing to come in and say, hey, we're going to act like the hacker and some of these things that are happening to test are our security measures in line. And so I came away as general counsel with a lot of comfort in terms of what IT's doing, and then you put that on top of the coverage. The coverage is just one element of this. It's what you do operationally, and I know that the underwriter is particularly going to be helpful in terms of providing some services in that area. So I think this is a win-win with the district. It was about $11,000 more than you had last year, and you got more coverage, something like that, which is pretty incredible in the market.
Absolutely.
So
did that address, I know you had questions. Did that address all your questions on that as well?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
The next area is employment practices liability. And as you saw, we had a slight premium increase in employment practices liability and directors and officers coverage by about 14%. It's driven by a couple of things. One, market conditions overall in this area, but also specifically with claims at JPS that were filed with JPS in terms of claims made and claims paid. So one of the things you look at here is you look at your loss history, and so I know in talking with these gentlemen here, you know, it's not unusual, certainly for public hospitals, to have a lot of claims. It doesn't necessarily mean one thing or another, but it does drive the overall market cost of this insurance. Workers' comp. Workers' comp, we had actually a payroll increase. Workers' comp insurance is based upon the payroll, the number of employees at the district is one of the key factors in pricing the insurance. And so we did have an increase in payroll from last year, but we only had a very slight overall premium increase, which is we consider to be a win. And actually the carrier actually reduced their rate overall in order for that to happen. So they work with us fairly well on that. And then the last comment I would make is on the new general liability coverage for the Moncrief Cancer Center leased space, as you see there, for $4,000. On the next page, on page 30, I'm sorry, yes.
Leave there?
Uh-huh.
Can I ask a question when you talk about the directors and office and employee practice liability? You said that we had an increase in claims. What kind of claims are?
Well, there are a variety of claims. They range from EEOC claims to employee filing claims against the district. What else would fall into that?
Discrimination, wrongful termination, things of this
okay.
nature make up the predominance of those type of claims.
They have a lot of them.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
You opened up by saying earlier that we had an overall 13% increase. No, let me rephrase it. You said we only had a 13% increase.
Yeah.
So is that 13% the norm throughout the marketplace now?
Well, in which line? In terms of property?
I don't know. You gave that we gave that had a 13% increase.
Yes.
I'm asking you, is it
Yeah.
across the board on all of, or was it this particular area?
Well, I'll say the 13%, we certainly had a 30% increase in property, and that has become the norm. I don't know about the absolute percentage, but in terms of getting used to having to pay more for property coverage because of hail, particularly in Texas. And I can certainly have Mike to talk about that. As far as overall, if you look at kind of the next slide in terms of the kind of the premium trend, we have several policies that are fairly flat as well. Some of the smaller policies are fairly flat, but the big ones, if you're in terms of kind of the bigger trend, if that's what your question is, which would be kind of be property, and I would put probably workers' comp into that category as well in terms of increasing trend. That, you know, that's from what we're gathering, those two areas are probably areas that we'll need to continue to watch because we will see increases in those. Is that fair to say from y'all's standpoint?
That answer your question?
Yeah, I just, when you said only a 13%, I mean, that's like.
It could be worse, I should say. It could have been worse.
I think 13%.
Property.
D&O and property.
Yes. Yeah, it did. Yeah, I guess it's relative. You're right. I mean, it's relative. I mean, they were, on the property side, they were in the part of the negotiations, they were wanting to make the premium, the cost of the insurance as a percentage of the district's overall property value, with a $1.5 billion, which would be much greater than the 13% in the case of property. So, yeah, no. So I'm not minimizing the fact that, you know, that we did have an increase, but I probably should say it's relative to what it could have been, and so it's not as bad as what it could have been. But that's a good clarification. So on the schedule that shows the premium comparison between last year and this year, in my comments I addressed kind of what some of the key changes were from last year to this year. So I'm certainly open to any questions anyone may have. And on the following slide is just a graphical depiction of each of the lines of coverage that shows the limits for each of the lines of coverage, as well as the retention and deductible amounts. So So I'll stop there and I'll take any questions anyone may have.
Any questions for Ron or our guest? What's the airport insurance?
It's where Robert lands his plane.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Ron, for the presentation. If there be no other questions, I will entertain a motion on item C, which is renewal of our insurance policy. Is that just what you need, Ron? Is this okay. We have approval by Dr. Weber, second by Mr. Powell. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I'm going to go back up to item 4, the CFO report.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Clark.
All right. I've just got a couple of reminders and updates for my report today. Last week, Robert and I took the approved budget from our August 9th meeting, and we met individually with the commissioners. I will say those meetings went very well from my perspective. We were able to meet with Commissioner Nguyen on Tuesday. We met individually with Commissioners Brooks and Johnson on Thursday, and we had a joint meeting with Judge Whitley and Commissioner Fickus. So I will be giving the formal presentation to the Commissioners Court on August 28th. That's next Tuesday. So more to come. And then I'm just going to go ahead and go into the financials.
Please do.
So for the month of July, I'm going to flip all the way to the end of my presentation and start there because it's a bit of an unusual month. The medical center, and again, I think this is page 48 if you're following along in your board portal. So we had some transactions where the medical center had some increased physician payments, but those physician payments went over to a claim. So you'll notice that for the month, we've got about a $1.4 million deficit in the hospital compared to budget. However, you'll also notice that on a claim, they actually made about $536,000 or about $1.5 million ahead of their budget. And that was because of that intercompany transaction between the hospital and a claim. So when you come over to the combined total, we're actually only about $100,000 off. And I spend a lot of time at the front of my financial report on the medical center. So I just wanted to kind of set the stage as we go through the medical center and then a claim. While I'm on this page, I'll go ahead and take care of the rest of it. So on a year-to-date basis, we have completed 10 months of our fiscal year. We are about $960,000 short from an operating margin standpoint. And if you take a look at our bottom line, we are about $300,000 ahead of our bottom line budget.
And this is the combined income
This is
statement.
the combined. So anytime we look at this last page, you'll notice there's the hospital, we have a claim, the foundation, and then the total column is what I'm calling our combined. Okay. So let me flip all the way back. I could have sent a new presentation, but it would have been late last night, so it's just as easy for me to flick through it. Okay. So for the month, our volumes have trended pretty much where they have year to date. Our admissions for this month were above about 6%. and our patient days were up by about 11. I think the major thing that I need to point out is what's going on over here with length of stay this month. We had one patient, and remember that the length of stay is calculated for discharged patients only. So it's not heads in beds, it's actually because we don't know when they're gonna be discharged. But, so this calculation really depends on who we get out of our beds. This month we had one patient that had a 279-day length of stay. He obviously had multiple comorbidities, but, and we transferred him out to another level of care. We also had 2 unusually high lengths of stay that were about 100 to 125 days discharged in the same month. So that's kind of a blip, obviously, for July. On the emergency department visits, you'll notice that it's actually about 2% below where we had budgeted. However, I do want to point out that it's a 5% increase from July. So if you look at the dark blue bars, you can see that there's quite a large increase. If you look at the year-to-date, we're seeing approximately 315 patients a day through the emergency department. That's 7 days a week. Dropping down to urgent care, you can see that this too is showing a negative variance to budget, but the number of people that we saw were equivalent to June. So it was kind of flat month to month. And on average, we're seeing about an additional 146 patients a day in urgent care. So you kind of have to think of the people that are coming in unscheduled, you have to add those two together. And these numbers do not include our psychiatric mental health side. On the right side of the page, we have primary care and specialty clinic visits. Those are both right about 3% under for the month. But just to put it in some context, we're seeing, we had about 27,000 primary care visits, and we had 19,250 specialty clinic visits just in this month. So, and our summer months are typically lower, as you can see. Our invasive lab on the top right is continuing to perform way above budget. We were about 9% above our budget in cases, and year-to-date in this service, it's 5% ahead of budget. So very strong numbers there. Our inpatient and outpatient surgery cases were 7% and 10% under respectively. You can see at the blue bar, we did have an increase from the prior month, so we're kind of starting to trend up from the first half of the year. And as you can see by this cluster, this 3-year trend, our summer months do tend to go down for outpatient surgeries. For psychiatry, our inpatient days continue to be very strong compared to our budget. About 6% ahead, and our clinic visits actually showed a bit of an increase from prior month, although those continue to be under budget as well. We were a bit aggressive when we budgeted those clinic volumes, but you can see from a prior year trend, we're well above. Our PEC, the emergency psychiatric service that we have here, trended about 15% under. Hopefully, I'm not sure, I have not statistically proven this, but when you can see them and treat them in the clinic setting, it's much more effective than them coming in through the PEC.
Sure.
So,
Ask
yes.
a question I should know as long as I've been around here. Someone might present at the ED and be actually a psych ED patient, but we count them differently. When they might come through the same door as a medical emergency.
So if a patient comes through and they have a combined issue, They're treated medically first, and they could be kept on a medical floor, and when they get through the medical issue and we could otherwise discharge them, they may be transferred to the psych unit, I believe is how it
So
works.
they would represent one on each count, right? I mean, a psych
If they
ED
were
visit and-
discharged from the inpatient side and readmitted to Trinity Springs, then yes, that would be a double
Interesting.
admission, I believe, the way we count it. I'll double check that for you.
Yeah, just curious. I didn't,
But we do have psychiatric admissions that are still on medical holds,
medical hold.
so,
Okay.
because Trinity Springs does not treat necessarily the medical issue.
Right.
So if it's a combined patient, it will remain at the medical center side.
Okay. Thank you.
And you'll also see that the partial hospitalization, which is kind of the long-term day program, so it might be an intensive 4 to 6 hours a day, that went way up. And talking to Zelia, that has to do with the fact that we're trying to re-educate both internally and externally and trying to get those folks into that program. Also, hopefully, limiting the unnecessary trips to the psych emergency center. The financial metrics this month remain unchanged, really. We are right now at about 201 days cash on hand that's available when we exclude the future fund from those dollars. If you recall, we are at the end of the year, I'll pull out another $10 million and put into the future fund. The net accounts receivable days remain at about 50 days, and our FTEs per APD, the number of hours paid, is still favorable compared to our year-end goal of 5.8 FTEs per adjusted patient day. Our payer mix does not change significantly month to month. And Steve's favorite slide, the JPS connection. We did increase that by about 1.1%, so we had a net increase for that program of 424 enrollees. So on the medical center side, again, the last few months, really since March, I believe, both our net patient revenue as well as our purchase service expense is impacted by the URIP program. We receive a lot more payment through the Medicaid MCOs, about $2.6 million, and we have an IGT of about $1.3 million down in the purchase service. Also, because the offload program has discontinued, so that we can IGT for our Tarrant County partners, that has another $1 million, $1.3 million impact on the budget. So if you look at the expense side, that's what's happening down in the $2.4 million. Also in that $2.4 million, I had mentioned at the beginning when we were looking at the combined statement, there is about $900,000 this month that the medical center is transferring over to pay for additional coverage, GME, and our quality incentive. Now that we were 9 months through the year, we can start to calculate the quality incentive payment that we send over to a claim for those self-paying connection patients that we pay professional fees on. So that was the significant difference. I will also point out that in our benefits area, it looks like it's pretty close to budget, but we do have a nice credit going through there that will hit July, August, and September for our pension plan expense. We talked about the pension plan funding, which is the cash that we send over. There's a whole different calculation that goes into what gets recorded on the financials. Because the pension plan has been earning nice market rates this year, we're able to take a credit of about $800,000 a month for the next 3 months. So when we get those actuarial reports, that tells us what we can record on our books on both sides. We did have a little bit of overage in health. It was about $400,000. So for the month, again, you can see the medical center has a variance of about $3 million for the operating margin and about $1.7 million for the bottom line. Yeah. Yeah, any questions on JPS? Okay. There's the build encounters, year-to-date, these encounters are down about 6%, but we have budgeted for additional onboarded physicians during the year. So we're about 9% under for these encounters. And if you look at our net operating expense per encounter at the bottom right, you can see that that's in a favorable status as well, not only for the month at about 1.5%, but for the year-to-date, for the first 10 months, we're about a 4% favorable status as you look at the cost per individual encounter. So when we look at a claim, again, that same $900,000 has come over into the other operating revenue. So hopefully I'm kind of trying to connect the dots there. Same as many months before, we have underages and net patient service revenue, but we also have savings and salaries. So this month, the bottom line is actually a gain of about $536. And year-to-date, if you remember in June, they were right on budget. So after this month, they're about $1.5 million ahead of their budget. And that is the comments that I had planned to do today. Does anybody else have any?
One question, did the physician services that are not part of a claim show up in purchase services on the hospital account?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it comes in as, and there's several large groups that are continuing this year, and as those contracts come up, we'll be moving
To a claim?
even the contracted physicians through a claim.
Okay.
Is the plan.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Got it. Any other questions for Sharon?
I do have
Yes, sir.
one. Do you have any further update on discussions you folks may have been having with Health and Human Services?
I can. There's not much of a definitive update, but I will tell you on the issue of the decline in our anticipated payment for UC and DISH. HHSC has created a task force of about 24 folks.
Tax court?
A task force.
You
Yes.
may have been right the first time.
Either one may work, but
Yeah,
yeah, so they have created a work group of about 24 people where they're collecting the comments. They're also taking written comments, and we have submitted about 3 formal written appeals and suggestions of how we feel like might be a more fair way to look at the formula.
Are there any public hospital representation on the task force?
There actually is. I believe there is a person from San Antonio I also sat with on the HPAC board, and I could hear him on the call. And I believe there's one other representative, and I'm not sure who they are. I haven't seen a written list, and the audio was very poor during that conference call.
Okay.
But we are, they had suggested 4 different calculations, one of which is no change, so really 3 alternatives. And the task force is coming together to talk about those 3 alternatives as well as other comments that HHSC has received. So at this point, we have about $38 million of UC, both projected for this year. I took it down to kind of the average. I'm gonna say this, and I hope that, there's not any significant changes downward, but I feel like we're safe at the 38 million for the budget that we just approved. And if there were any changes made, that would actually be a pickup from the 38 million. So, there will be more to come. They're going to make a preliminary distribution in September, which usually is their final calculation, but because of these public comments that were made and appeals after the initial calculation had been pushed down, I believe that they will not be making their final distribution until December or January.
Do you know if Mike Spivey is part of that discussion?
I work very closely with him and Corey Goldman to prepare our comments back to HHSC. Corey and I were both listening in on the call, as it's a public meeting. I believe it was closed, but it was, you could dial in and listen. So I know there's a lot of activity and a lot of attention given to this.
Should be.
You said there were 3 proposals. Did they come from HHS?
Yes,
Okay.
HHSC had sent out an initial memo, I think the week of my budget presentation, to say, you know, because of the unintended changes in the
Yeah,
the
unintentional
pool.
and unintended are two different
Yes,
things.
Different things.
unintentional or unintended.
Intentionally unintended.
Yes, but, you know, I think from that memo, they announced that they would be forming a task force, and then they had suggested options 1, 2, 3, and 4, if we would like to make comments. We're not limited, HHSC has not limited themselves to those 4 options. The first option was do nothing and let the formula funding fall where it may, which is the most negative for the public hospitals.
Did they give you sort of you said January, did they have sort of a timeline for the task force? Was it just over the
I've not been made privy to that, but they're moving fairly quickly. I know that they had sent out the letter, they had the task force done by Wednesday. I think the conference call was on Thursday. So I was able to sit in for about an hour and a half between our meetings with the commissioners. So they are moving pretty quickly.
Great. Any other questions for Sharon on the financial report? I would request a motion to accept the report. A motion by Reverend Emerson, second by Ms. DeBose. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Sharon. I'd move to item 5E. Ms. Whelan. Good morning, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. I'm here today with 2 contracts. The first one is with Telcor, and Telcor is a second amendment. I'm asking for approval for the second amendment, and this is for the software interface that allows us to take the information from our iStat analyzers that are located in places such as the EP, downloads that information into the lab information system, and then moves that data over to Epic, which is our EMR. So this is the interface for that system. It's for $149,000 for this interface, but that's because we're here today because it's an amendment to the larger contract.
Right. Okay, you've heard Kathleen's description. Any questions for her? We have a motion by Ms. DeBose, second by Dr. Weber. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Item F, please.
Thank you. My second contract is for Abbott Laboratories, and this is for the reagent costs for those iStats that are used in those critical care areas and in other locations in the organization. It's a $449,366 annual fee. It's a 3-year contract, and it is a sole source because these are the only reagents that work with those ISTAT units.
Right. Okay. Heard the description. Any questions for Kathleen? We have a motion by Mr. Petty. Second by Mr. Bose. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. We're going to table item G and move on to item H. Dr. Duncan, good morning.
Good morning.
We have to, because what's his name is here, we have to do each one of these individually.
I
We
was just
can't
getting
do
ready to
them
say, I actually
en
have
masse.
4 agreements.
Yeah.
All are, I was hoping we could do them all together, but all are school-based clinic agreements between
Ms. Duncan,
the-
before you get started on those previous 2 votes on Abbott and on Telcor, we need to be sure that the motion included that not only approving the contract, but approving the exception to bid, okay? I apologize. Thank you.
It's okay. Again, I'm here today with 4 agreements. All are school-based clinic agreements between the independent school districts and the hospital district. The first one is the agreement between Eagle Mountain Saginaw Independent School District and the hospital district.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm laughing you, man. I'm like laughing you.
No, he was talking in my ear.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. For item H, any questions for Dr. Duncan? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Item I.
The second one that I'm asking approval for is between the Birdville Independent School District and the Tarrant County Hospital District.
It also includes Fort Worth ISD. This item I.
This is item I.
Yeah, it's a tri-party agreement with, between those 2 school districts in the county and the hospital district, okay?
Got it.
Move second.
Motion by Mr. Petty, second by Mr. Powell. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
was I.
J.
Third agreement is between Grapevine Colleyville Independent School District and the hospital, Tarrant County Hospital District.
Okay. We have a motion by Reverend Emerson, second by Mr. Bose. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Item
Thank you.
K.
And the fourth one's between Mansville ISD Independent School District and the Tarrant County Hospital District.
Okay. A motion by Mr. Powell, second by Reverend Emerson. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Linda Costin, item L. Good morning, Melinda.
Good morning, Ms.
Oh, yeah. My first item is related to patient education. The purpose of this request is that we really want to enhance the education that's going to our patients. In the past, we've been using 2 separate sources, one for video and one for patient information, written information. They were not coming from the same vendor, and they were not coordinated. Both of those contracts end in December, and so we really took some time with a multidisciplinary team to analyze what really would be the best thing for our patients, what would make it the easiest for them. As a result of that, we did a lot of research. We did go out for RFP with that multidisciplinary team, and we did select a vendor called HealthWise. We selected them because they had a lower reading level at the 4th grade level, so we felt that most people could understand that information, that they had coordinated video and reading material, so if you looked at both of those sources, you could see the significance of them being coordinated. The pictures, bless you, the pictures represent a diverse population, which is very appropriate to our environment. There's a lot of white space in that information, and it's in both English and Spanish all the time, as well as
Melinda, I have a quick question for you. And I'm all in favor of anyone, any system we can use that helps people engage in their own healthcare. Do we have tools, or are there tools embedded in the solution that help us gauge how people are accessing it?
Oh, I'm so glad you did mention that, because not only do we embed it in our after-visit summary that they get in their hand once they've had a visit here, But all of this information is available on our intranet as well. So the fact that somebody who hasn't even been a patient yet could come into our site, which is wonderful, and get this information about anything they may be concerned about, and have that opportunity to educate themselves, and maybe even save themselves a visit to the hospital.
So, but there are ways we can measure how many, the number of times it's being accessed?
Oh, absolutely.
Just in terms of return on investment, is it actually being used?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I think this will be used so much more because they can use it off of our intranet, which was not a capability we had with our other vendors. I'm really glad you asked that, thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Melinda?
3-year contract.
3-year,
Does this have any exceptions, any kind of?
No, we're not to bid.
Okay, you've heard it. Any other questions for Melinda? Entertain a motion for, yes, sir.
One, something like this would be helpful if a demonstration could be done.
Oh, we'd love to do that.
To understand. On the employer information report,
Where are you looking at?
page 264.
Ralph, it went to bid. But it's out of Idaho.
Boise, Idaho. What do you expect?
Yeah, it's the Boise, Idaho. Yeah, Ralph, I think that's the point that came up here. This company's out of Boise, and obviously their diversity and their employment base is probably subject to being out of Idaho.
The regional, yeah, Idaho.
But I think the idea of having a presentation is a good idea, too.
Are you okay moving forward?
Yeah.
So we have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Melinda. Item M.
The second item is related to Kronos. Kronos is our workforce time and attendance system. We use it on a regular basis every day, and all of our users have to use it from inside the hospital at this point. This is for Kronos Mobile that will allow our staff to be able to look at the time that the employees are scheduled for, to approve PTO, et cetera, via the mobile phone. So they can do it from home, they can do it from here. It'll be a tremendous efficiency and time saver for our staff to be able to handle Kronos activities for the workforce via the phone.
Okay, I've heard the description. Melinda, any questions?
This also requires, as part of the motion, that this is an exception to the bid.
As a sole source?
This is only provided by Kronos.
No, it's not as a sole source because of patent copyrights. No, it's not sole source, it's because of copyrights and patents.
Copyrights and patents, all right. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
No, I didn't have a question. I didn't have a question.
Oh,
I was
you
just waiting
making a
on-
motion?
I was gonna make a motion to approve it with the exception to the connectivity.
Motion from Ms. DeBose, second by Mr. Powell. All in favor, please say aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Melinda. Mr. Rule, item N.
To seek approval of the contract for legal services between the Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney and the Hospital District. The changes that were made from the previous current contract were the removal of services related to risk issues, EMTALA issues, informed consent, and organ donations. So those matters would typically go to the General Counsel's office going forward, as well as a kind of a catch-all phrase that we might request any additional issues be reviewed by the District Attorney's office, and that has also been removed. So this contract's a little more specific as to the issues that the District Attorney's office would contemplate. The increase in services from the district attorney's office include the provision of review of contracts between $200,000 and $500,000 to coincide with the Board of Managers' increase of that hurdle, that threshold to come to the Board of Managers. Okay. This is a 2-year contract. It does contemplate a $94,000 a year increase and an increase in number of FTEs provided to the disposal of the hospital district from 1 attorney to 2 attorneys.
So question, and
Yes, sir.
Neil or Scott, either one, tell me what precipitated the removal of these elements from the DA's office to general counsel?
Yeah, thank you. As it relates to risk issues, and that's, as you know, Mr. Petty, literally that's the way it was, risk issues. I think it was a little ubiquitous.
Okay.
I think it was really hard to define exactly what those are, and I think this adds some specificity to what those are. EMTALA, informed consent.
In that case, that would have really been more reflection of what's normally done, not necessarily a change in the contract in terms of procedure.
In terms of risk, there's various types of risk.
Right.
We get involved with the EMTALA, informed consent, and organ donations. Those are things we've been doing, even though the contract said otherwise.
Yeah, that's my point. Procedurally, general counsel was doing those
We were doing
risk
these
elements
anyway.
For the most part,
Correct.
yes, sir.
Yes, exactly.
That was
Yeah.
my point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Not
then-
going undone.
No,
No, I understood. I was just trying to understand if it had changed, then what the circumstances were, and then beyond risk, what was the other one?
EMTALA.
Okay, and that was one
Yeah,
general
yeah,
counsel
yeah.
was-
And those are things that tie back to other things we do anyway, so
Okay.
that makes sense.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
So then, you mentioned a moment ago, Scott, that their contract increased by $94,000.
Right.
Does our contract here increase also, since we're picking that up?
Well, what we, I think, would anticipate is the increase in the cost of the contract with the district attorney's office would be offset in legal fees that we'd otherwise pay to outside counsel. Because those contracts and those matters would just move over to the district attorney's office rather than outside firms that might be doing that.
the contracts between 200,000 and 500,000 would move to the DA. They've been coming to my office. Those are since you changed that policy in February. There's an average of about 2.5 per month of those contracts, which equates to about 30 additional contracts a year between 200 and 500,000 if the trend continues.
Okay, but, okay. We're taking or moving something from the district attorney's office to JPS?
No, sir.
Or it's
This-
already at JPS?
Those would be services that previously, historically, as it relates to the contract review, would have been done exclusively by the general counsel's office. And by-
Anything over 200,000, the district attorney's contract currently specifies that they handle things contracts below 200,000, anything above would come to my office. This proposed one would change that threshold to anything below 500,000 would go to the DA, and anything above 500,000 would come to my office.
So to the extent available,
and
we'll be
that's a-
moving that contract review from the general counsel's office to the district attorney's office. Obviously, the general counsel's office reviews anything that comes before the board. And there's also exclusions that we're all aware of in terms of real estate and graduate medical education. some other things.
Those exclusions that are under item 1E on the exceptions to anything going to the DA, even under 500, have been in my contract since 2007, so.
And didn't the 500 threshold become relevant, or at least became, didn't we just up Roberts? I mean, this is not an action that was just independent of the DA. This was, I think,
we
it
made that
lines
policy
up with what
change.
was given to Robert at the okay.
You made that policy change in February, and then
Right.
Mr. Montgomery asked that I announce monthly at this meeting, continue to announce
Right.
what contracts are listed and posted on the board's website that were under 200,000, but to also, once you made that policy change, to announce what the contracts between 200 and 500 were. And since February, that's been averaging about 2.5 contracts a month, which would equate to about 30 a year increase.
So Scott, are we I mean, I know we had some changes in personnel and some retirements last year. Are we still tracking performance-wise with what we have in previous years in terms of collections and follow-up on cases and all that? Kind of tell me how we're doing.
Yeah, Paula's group is still doing just a terrific job of keeping track of the number of contracts submitted, approved, turnaround time, those type of items. In your executive summary, I think you can see the collections. Even with the increase in expense with the district attorney's office, their collections to fees are still at or below 10%, and we still track all of that.
Yeah,
We would
we're on
expect them to
do
collect a
about,
little over
looks
$4 million
like
this year.
Another $4
Yeah,
million
another $4
in
million.
collections.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's 10 months, yeah.
That's the total cost of the DA's cost as a percentage of the collections. So.
Yeah, it's still 10%. Okay, thanks.
Okay, any further questions for Scott? Entertain a motion. Motion by Dr. Weber, second by Mr. Petty. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
Great, thank you.
You, Scott. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Yes, sir, turn your mic on.
Somehow I lost my notes in going through here, but I talked, just prior to the meeting, on the school-based clinic stuff, or contracts, there's different ages for what is supported.
Different what?
Ages.
Ages.
Age.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just curious why. One was, I have.
Talking about in the contracts themselves?
In the, yes.
Wasn't, Chuck, didn't it stipulate between, where the school was, based on the ages?
Well, it may depend on whether it's on an elementary council or on a middle school or a high school campus.
Yeah.
In terms
Yes,
of
and
ages.
I put you at sort of a disadvantage.
had approached me,
Ask
yeah,
them
and
right
I will
from
be
the
glad, I will be glad to review that. However, those are collaborative agreements that our providers sign based on their training, so whether it's a family nurse practitioner or a pediatric nurse practitioner. Currently, all of our sites are staffed by family nurse practitioners. And the ages that are seen at all of our sites are between the ages of newborn to 24 years of age, and that's signed, that's outlined in their collaborative agreements that they sign.
Yeah.
But we will take a look at all of those contracts.
Yeah, I
standardize
apologize
those.
for putting you on the spot at the last second.
No, I appreciate it.
All those school-based clinics are templates, and so they're pretty well the same, except there'll be a few variations in terms of what services are provided, and those are done by attachments to the agreements. But age is going to be very depending on where that clinic is.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Duncan.
Thank you.
Okay, item 6, any report of council? Good timing.
What am I going to say? Talking about contracts, for the month of July, contracts under $200,000 that were negotiated by the district attorney's office there were 18. Those have been posted, that list, to your website. The contracts negotiated between $200,000 and $500,000 by my office for the month of July were 4. One other thing that I would mention to you, if you noticed on the governance committee agenda, I'll be walking through my legal opinion as well, and I gave you a legal opinion, I think on the 17th, and then I had a substitute opinion where I made some clarifications on the bond in terms of what related, Reverend Emerson, to your question at the last, I believe, board meeting. And so it outlines legally what you as board members and officers can do. The big issue is whether you're using hospital time or resources, or you're using your own time and resources. If you're using your own time and resources, you can be an advocate. You don't have to be just an educator, and you can even use your title as part of that process. So And I'd be happy to talk to you about those issues then, or if anybody had a question right now that's not going to be at governance.
Well, I would say that, and I think Charlie would agree with this, based on where we sit, do we have any personal time? I think it's all hospital time.
Well, I think from a board member's perspective, that official time of the district would be when you are at an officially called meeting. If you're not that's your own time, so, okay?
I'll forego my salary until now.
Okay, well, you might get a percentage raise out of this, for after it's all said and done. You'll get the same percentage I got when I was here, so.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Any questions for council? Okay. We have, you may leave. We have nothing in closed, so we are adjourned.